Hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel. If you're new to the channel, well, you've picked a great day to pop along because it's time for the A to ZX of the Spectrum, the small series where we look at games from this wonderful little machine up there, and we do it alphabetically, and we're 18 episodes in, so it's time for the letter R. Now, last week after I posted the letter Q episode, I found out that Sir Clive Sinclair had passed away. So this week I'd like to dedicate the letter R, episode 18, to Sir Clive Sinclair, a man who absolutely changed the gaming landscape in the UK, and he certainly changed it for me. So if you want to see 5 games from the letter R from the ZX Spectrum, then you just wait until after these titles. So for the first game in the letter R, I could choose no better game than Bruce Carver's Raid Over Moscow. Raid Over Moscow takes us away from the World War II setting and transports us to the nuclear front line of the 80s Cold War era. The United States has lost all of its nuclear arsenal and is now under threat of an imminent nuclear attack by Russia, and only you can save the day. The gameplay, like in many of the games of the microcomputer age, is split into several distinct parts. A fantastic technique which really did help in giving those early games a bit of longevity. The first part sees the player take control of an aircraft, which has to be launched out of an orbital base and guided to Russia, where the second stage will begin. This second stage turns to a vertical shooter which has, well, almost 3D aspects, where you have to dodge or destroy the various obstacles put in your path to reach the Russian silo that you're currently attacking. Now on reaching the silo, the game then shifts to a horizontal shooter, like Space Invaders, but with the added twist of having to account for the height of your target. On successfully taking out this silo, well, you have to repeat this process again for the remaining silos, and if you do manage to take out all the silos, then you move on to the game's boss, that being none other than Moscow. And in Moscow we see the return of the tried and tested elevation game, another horizontal shooter where you have to line up your soldier with his target, then select the correct elevation before firing. Of course there are enemies shooting at you as well, so don't expect it to be a relaxing game. If however you do manage to defeat Moscow's defences, you get to the end game proper. Another pseudo 3D horizontal shooter, but this time you have to bounce your bullets off the back of the wall, as your enemy can only be hit from behind. Now you do only have one enemy in this level, but it takes several hits to take them out, and to be completely honest, I have never beaten this game. But I don't say that with any shame at all, because these games are hard as nails. This is classic 80s microcomputer gameplay at its finest, and I have no hesitation in recommending anyone to get this game and get it played. Raid Over Moscow, Bruce Carver's masterpiece from 1985. Second up for the letter R, we have Taito's 1987 Rainbow Islands. Now anyone who knows gaming at all, especially retro gaming, will know that Rainbow Islands is the second part to Bubble Bobble. Both of them exceptionally good arcade games, very popular and very much beloved in the community. But this isn't just about Rainbow Islands, this is about the ZX Spectrum port of Rainbow Islands. So how does it stack up? Pardon the pun, because obviously in this game you stack up rainbows to try and get up the levels. Now for me this is one of the finest examples of an arcade port on a ZX Spectrum, because even graphically, despite the ZX Spectrum's infamous colour clash, the developers done a wonderful job of getting this game onto the 8-bit microcomputer that, well, I absolutely adore. And not just graphically, of course the gameplay is solid too. Now of course the gameplay in Rainbow Islands is quite simple, it's what I like to call a platform climber. So there's nothing too complex about it to start with, but of course it's the speed at which it can run on a ZX Spectrum that's truly astounding, because despite the simple nature of the game, everything else that's going on the screen is quite complex. The backgrounds are detailed, the enemy sprites are just delightful in this game, and of course you have to throw those rainbows left, right and centre to progress further up the screen, all of which are taking up the limited resources on the ZX Spectrum, but it handles it like an absolute champ. so pretty much the same as Bubble Bobble. I don't think there is a bad port of this game anywhere. And even if it's just the ZX Spectrum port you have, well, you're doing okay as far as I'm concerned, because the ZX Spectrum certainly punches above its weight when it comes to delivering the speed and complexity of this game. And the only thing that you're truly missing out on is the music, because the ZX Spectrum didn't have a dedicated sound chip. But would I recommend anyone buying Rainbow Islands for the ZX Spectrum today? Well, yes, because every port, as I've said, is absolutely outstanding when it comes to this game, and the ZX Spectrum is no exception. So if you get the chance, go out there and get this game and give it a go on the old Speccy. And that's Rainbow Islands from Taito in 1987. I'm not going to apologise because I had to put you through that, because if I had to play this game and listen to that, so did you. And that of course is the title music from Return of the Jedi by Domar in 1984. But enough of the music, let's get on to the game. And the game itself, well, it's a little bit disappointing. You see, of course, back in the mid 80s we tried to get our hands on anything Star Wars. As a kid of the 70s I grew up with Star Wars, and Star Wars was almost my religion. So much so that in the last census I put my religion down as Jedi. And I'm absolutely not kidding there, but again, I digress, so let's get back to the game. Now this game's a very early game and it's a very simple game. Graphically it's okay, but it's the amount of gameplay that you actually get with this game that is a bit disappointing. You see, there's only 2 levels, or at least there's only 2 levels I've ever discovered. The first one being this speeder bike level, which, don't get me wrong, plays okay, and once you get over the frustration of not being able to line your speeder bike up just perfectly, because you need to do it pixel perfect in this game, then you discover that this level is actually quite short in fact. Now on the positive sides, as I've said, graphically it's quite nice. The scrolling's quite smooth, the Ewok characters are fantastic, and even the crash animations are well above the average output we used to get back then. But as I've said, there's more than one level. There's this short speeder bike level, and then you move on to the Death Star run. And disappointingly so, it's pretty much the same again. Instead of being on a speeder bike, you're in the Millennium Falcon, you're flying through the insides of the new Death Star, trying to get to the core to blow it up. And what's the most disappointing thing about this is the graphics in this level. Now I know they're inside the Death Star now, so they can't have the lush trees and obviously the Ewoks standing by with their traps. But what we're left with is this stale, sterile blue screen. Not very interesting to look at, and besides the fact that the Millennium Falcon is not too badly detailed, this was not a visually appealing level. Now would I recommend anyone play this version of Return of the Jedi then? Well, only if you're a Star Wars fan or a die-hard Spectrum fan, because honestly it doesn't have enough to keep your interest outside being a collector. And that's despite the wonderful Ewoks that make an appearance and their wonderful little animations at time. And that was Return of the Jedi by Domar in 1984. Just when you think you had enough torture with the Star Wars music, well, I throw in the Rambo First Blood Part 2 music. Sorry about that, but you deserve to hear it as well. But from here at least things start to look up, because unlike Return of the Jedi, Rambo First Blood Part 2 on the ZX Spectrum is a decent game. That's absolutely right, you heard me correctly. We have a decent licensed game on the ZX Spectrum. And what makes it so decent? Well, it's quite simply the gameplay. You see, it's a run and gun shooter, but not a vertical scrolling shooter. No, it was an early open world exploration run and shoot. Now graphically, of course, it's not too bad for the ZX Spectrum. Yes, we have the monochromatic themes, we have a plain black background on top of which we have all the assets needed for the game. Now of course the jungle does look a bit sparse in this game. Little trees dotted here and there, an occasional bush or rock, or maybe even a puddle. Well, I'm assuming the little blue blotches are puddles, but nevertheless, the game does play exceedingly well for the ZX Spectrum. So the game itself, what's it all about? Well, it's about Rambo. You're John J. Rambo, you have been dropped off in the jungle, you're on a mission to save the prisoners of war and get straight back to the extraction point. Now to do so, well, you've got to find the prisoner of war camp, but also you've got to find your weapons. You do start with unlimited knives and grenades, and I'm trying to search my memory for the film, but I'm pretty sure Rambo did lose all his equipment on his journey to the jungle, which is probably why this particular aspect has made it into the game. You have to run around this jungle and find the rest of your equipment, which includes of course his traditional bow and arrow with both normal arrowheads and explosive arrowheads, and of course there's a rocket launcher and M16 rifle out there to find. And why this makes the game a little bit more interesting as well, there's a roguelike mechanic to this game where, well, you never find your weapons in the same place twice. Now of course you don't need to find all the weapons, but you do of course need to find at least one explosive item to get into the POW camp, because the whole point of the game is to save the POWs and get yourself out of there. But as soon as you find either the rocket launcher or the bow and arrow, you're set to go into the POW camp at any time you want. And again, it's open world, so you'll have to run about until you find them. Another thing that made this game stand out, well, the buildings and the trees were destructible. That's correct, it was one of the early examples of almost completely destructible anything, which let me tell you, in 1985 was absolutely mind-blowing, and gave yet another reason for all the hours I ploughed into this game as a kid. And would I recommend anyone playing Rambo now in 2021? Well, absolutely, it's such a fun game. So yes, without a doubt, get out there, get yourself a copy of Rambo First Blood Part 2 on the ZX Spectrum and get it played. Just try not to listen to the music too much and you should be okay. And that is Rambo First Blood Part 2 from Motion Software in 1985. For the last game in the letter R, we're going to be looking at Rebelstar, published by Firebird in 1986. Now I'm going to apologise straight away because there won't be a lot of action in the gameplay, but the reason I've picked this game is quite simple. It was a landmark game in my gaming history where you can begin to chart where my gaming preferences were going to lead. And that's quite simply because, as you can see from the gameplay, Rebelstar is a turn-based tactics shooter. Now don't get me wrong, turn-based tactics games aren't my number one genre of all time. No, that's turn-based JRPGs. But since I didn't have access to turn-based JRPGs back when I was playing this game, this was the closest game to the genre that was going to absolutely captivate me for the next, well, several decades, let's just say that. Now there are two rather remarkable facts that come along with Rebelstar. The first one being, well, it was the first remake or remaster I had ever played, and probably the first one I can think of ever being made. You see, Rebelstar Raiders was a game, but it was programmed in BASIC, and what happened was, well, they came along and decided to rework it into machine code, which took Rebelstar Raiders and made it the Rebelstar that I knew and loved. And secondly, what we're actually looking at here is the granddaddy of all tactical turn-based shooting games. Because even if you're not aware of Rebelstar or played it back in the day or whatever, you probably know the XCOM games. Well, without Rebelstar, there would be no XCOM games, because this is where XCOM came from. Now, it's definitely not the type of game that was designed for a 13-year-old. They definitely didn't have young teenagers in mind when they were making this game. So it became absolutely clear to me at the time that I was moving away from classic arcade style games and wanting something just a bit deeper in my gameplay. And Rebelstar was certainly that. And then there was an extra bonus in the game. Well, you see, you could play it one player against the CPU, against the good old Speccy, but you could also play it two player against a friend. Now of course you did need a friend who was willing to play Rebelstar, because it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, and it probably still isn't everyone's cup of tea. But if you did have a friend who was into the tactical turn-based shooters like you, then this was fantastic. So despite practicing from time to time against the CPU, which I could beat mostly every time, what I really thrived on with this game was the head-to-head with friends. So can I recommend this game to anyone out there watching this? Well, if you love tactical turn-based games, if you're a fan of the modern XCOM games, then definitely you get your hands on this and you see where that genre of game all started. Rebelstar, published by Firebird in 1986. So there you go, my friends, that's another 5 8-bit masterpieces from the ZX Spectrum, and well, I always think they're 8-bit masterpieces, but that's just me. Now if you want to talk about any of these games, drop down there in the comments. That's what the comments section's for, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Whether it's you've played these games and you want to talk about them, or you have no experience of these games at all and also want to talk about them, drop it down in the comments. And On your way out, if you've enjoyed this video, I would appreciate a thumbs up because 1, it's good for the channel, and 2, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And of course, if you want to see more, well, the subscription button, always there, always free, and you can always change your mind. So thank you again for watching, and until next time, as always, cheerio!